Hi, I'm Tom Slater. Last year, the University Press of Kentucky published my book, June Mathis, The Rise and Fall of a Silent Film Visionary. In this book, I consider Mathis as an artist who knew what she wanted her films to show. I discuss her life, her knowledge of filmmaking, her writing, her work in the studios, the challenges she faced, and what she accomplished. Much of what she aimed for artistically can be understood by considering the 5 films she made with Rudolph Valentino in 1921 and 22. Camille, The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, The Conquering Power, Blood and Sand, and The Young Raja. She also wrote her script for Ben-Hur with him in mind. Rudy always credited June with raising him to fame in The Four Horsemen, and her films with him constructed a character that was very different from the ones he played in The Sheik and other films. The Golden Silent Films podcast will be devoting much of its programming to Valentino this year on the 100th anniversary of his passing, and including a lot of insights on his important relationship with June Mathis. So I hope a lot of fans will take this opportunity to learn more about these 2 important artists. I know you'll enjoy doing so. Thank you.
Crescere in Calabria era una vita semplice, rumorosa e piena di vita. La gente non aveva molto, ma non sembrava mai che mancasse qualcosa. Tutti si conoscevano e le strade erano come una parte della casa. I bambini stavano fuori tutto il giorno, correvano, si sporcavano e inventavano giochi e tornavano a casa solo quando una mamma urlava dal balcone che è ora di mangiare. Le famiglie erano molto unite, da veri vicini. Spesso si viveva tutti insieme, condividendo spazio, cibo e storie. I pasti erano semplici ma importanti. Pasta, pane, olio d'oliva e verdura dell'orto. Il sugo era sempre sul fuoco e nessuno aveva fretta di finire di mangiare. La vita non era facile, il lavoro era duro e i soldi erano pochi. Molti uomini uscivano presto la mattina o andavano lontano per lavoro, mentre le donne tenevano tutti insieme a casa. Erano forti in silenzio, facevano quello che servizia senza tante parole. Nel paese c'era sempre qualcosa: feste, matrimoni, processioni religiosi, musica nelle strade. Questi giorni portavano gioia e univano tutti. Ti faceva sentire parte di qualcosa più grande. Crescere ti insegnava a essere forte e condividere e a contare sulla famiglia. Non era perfetto, ma era vero. E questi ricordi restano con te anche se vai lontano.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Season 6 premiere of the Golden Silent Films podcast. This is our first chronological step in the Year of Valentino series that we are putting on in 2026. We are starting the story at the beginning with the Latin lover's humble beginnings in his native Italy. When we decided to go all in on the life of Rudolph Valentino on the centennial of his death, it seemed only right to tell his story in order. This is the first piece of a year-long puzzle that we hope will present the heartthrob and his story in new and interesting ways, with some fun side quests and stories along the way. Before we travel to picturesque Italy, let's talk about the various Golden Silent Films podcast social media outlets. As always, head on over to Golden Silence Cast on Instagram and Bluesky for up-to-date info on this show. And for all of you folks on X or Twitter, just follow at Golden Silence 1 or search Golden Silence Cast and we should pop up. All of these screen names and sites will be in the episode description in case you are interested in checking us out. We would love to have you on board at these social spaces. You'll get behind-the-scenes pics and info, upcoming episode reveals, and other fun film-related materials. And you also get fun photos of our podcats, Soda and Gizmo, who are heartthrobs in their own right. Also, if you're listening to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or Amazon Music, please do us a favor and leave comments, reviews, ratings, or all of the above. Our show has existed for 6 years now, and we've only received 20 reviews on iTunes. We would love to see those numbers keep growing, and you awesome silent film fans out there can definitely make it happen. All of those ratings and reviews help so much. So, in that vein, live your best review leaving life and help our show grow and reach fellow silent film fans. Dropping those reviews gives us more exposure in the world of podcasts, and as always, lets us know how we can improve. As always, we are grateful for any and all feedback and always want to bring you the best show humanly possible. And please subscribe to the Golden Silent Films podcast. While our output can be sketchy and irregular, if you are subscribed, you will never miss an episode, and the moment new content drops, it will go straight to your listening device of choice. We are starting our 6th season right now and don't want you to miss a second going forward. So, you know those magic words, whether it's on podcasts or YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and hit those various bells for notifications. Now, before we get into the episode proper, we have to thank our Italian correspondent, Raffaella, for opening the show by taking us back to her childhood in southern Italy. It would be bad podcast manners to discuss Rodolfo's childhood in southern Italy without setting the scene with some Italian-speaking atmosphere and ambiance about growing up in the Calabrian region of southern Italy. It's not Castellaneta, to be fair, but it is still the bottom of that geographic boot. This episode is exactly what you would expect from the title. We are going to take a look at the earliest years of that Italian idol. The childhood of young Rudolfo did a lot to mold him into the man he would become, into the man that audiences would watch on screen. When you see his upbringing, you really start to understand the man a little more. It's no surprise that a person's youth plays into their evolution as the years go on. Oddly enough, not only would real-life situations and experiences mold the adult Rudolph Valentino, but his later years would be influenced by things that never happened to him. Rudolfo's childhood set the stage for the lore and mystery that eventually enveloped the superstar. Much has been written and talked about the upbringing of Valentino, but how much of what we read and hear is the truth? Like any good actor or actress of the era, they never let the truth get in the way of a good story. On the topic of history and backstory, this is not our first foray into the life of Rudolph Valentino. Way back in our first season, as I'm sure you longtime listeners of the show remember, we did a biographical episode following the Latin lover. It was literally our 4th episode ever, following a breakdown of the 1925 Valentino feature Cobra. It originally aired on January 23rd, 2021, and trust me, it sounded like our 4th episode ever. We hardly knew what we were doing, to be honest. Here we are on episode 78, and I like to believe that we have become a more polished and entertaining listening experience for all of you out there. Our processes alone have changed remarkably. During the making of that episode 5 years ago, we were new to the silent film world and even newer to the research and historical data collection scene. In the time since that early episode, we have discovered new research avenues and books and publications that have hopefully made this a more historically accurate show. We have always been driven to give you the most legitimate information, and over the years we've done a lot better, rounding up the best sources possible to pass on to you. We are super proud, however, of our Blood and Sand episode, though. That is one Valentino episode we feel came when we were running at or close to our peak. We were really happy with the research and the entertainment value in that episode. That is what we strive for ultimately here at the podcast, is to bring you throughout the year of 2026. It also falls perfectly in line with what we are doing this season by breaking up the life of Valentino into subsections, if you will. This season is our chance to take a second swing at recounting the life of Rudolph Valentino. It's been a wild road getting here, and we are so happy to be given this opportunity to show our growth a little as a show and see how far we've come since that 4th episode all those years ago. As we just talked about, the life of Valentino is often shrouded in a fog of mystery and legend. Many tall tales and romantic, fanciful backstories have been created over the last 100 plus years, so research can be difficult. Now, I love mythical narratives just as much as the next podcaster, but we strive to bring you the best information possible. Fiction can be fun, but we want to cut through the mess of fables and bring you the most legitimate stories possible. To make that possible, there is one incredible book out there that really takes you inside the life of Rudolph Valentino. That book is Dark Lover, The Life and Death of Rudolph Valentino. It was written by Emily W. Leiter and is a real tour de force of the Hollywood biography genre. It was a book we will be turning to countless times throughout this year-long deep dive into the life of the star actor. It does an incredible job of putting you right next to Rodolfo for every step of his incredible journey. It also is a phenomenally researched account that really ties all aspects of Rudy's life together. From humble villages in Italy to the bright lights of Hollywood, it is all there in black and white. It is, for the Golden Silent Films podcast's money, one of the best bios out there. It definitely is worth checking out. Now, with that being said, it really sets the standard for research on Valentino. We did our best to fit in other resources and writers and biographers into this episode, but Leiter's work is so good it was tough to fit anyone else in. On top of that, many previous biographers stuck with the lore, legend, and sensationalism handed down from both Valentino and various publicists and tall tales handed out in trade papers. Some works, like Valentino, An Intimate and Shocking Expose by Brad Steiger and Shaw Mank, present their own set of problems when it comes to deep, fact-based research, but there is some gold in them thar Italian hills, and we will add those resources when applicable, and respectable, and credible. Despite this being a Valentino-centric show, it's going to be a few minutes until our star and leading man is birthed into the story. Instead, let's shine a spotlight on the two parents who would eventually bring little Rudy into the world. The overall story of the life of Rudolph Valentino will prove to be an incredibly international story, so it's only appropriate that his mother and father would have quite the international history themselves. Now, Giovanni Guglielmi, Rudolfo's father, served in the military where he was a Royal Army Grenadier and second lieutenant of artillery, trained at the State Military Academy in Rome. According to Leiter, Giovanni was not wealthy. He had wanted to study medicine in Naples, but for financial reasons switched to veterinary science, which required less training. But his learning and dedication to an essential profession elevated him to a place of honor in this hard-pressed agricultural village of about 7,000 residents, where machines had not yet displaced the wooden plow and the scythe. Giovanni traveled the countryside, tending to the livestock of the rural farmers who paid often not with money, but with what the farmers produced from their land: cheese, wine, olives, their grain harvests. His work as a vet eventually led to a higher calling that affected not just animals, but humanity as well. He began studying and doing lab research on malaria, which was prevalent in the area, and after researching the deaths of horses and cattle, he found how the disease could be transmitted to the animals by mosquitoes just as it was transmitted to humans. In Dark Lover, we get some words from Valentino himself about the work his father did. He would say, "There had been many deaths among the cattle and horses of our district, and my father was studying constantly for a method of checking the epidemic. He finally diagnosed the disease as malaria, which until then had been considered a disease peculiar to human beings." Leiter would add, according to Rodolfo, his father achieved a scientific breakthrough discovering that mosquito bites could infect cattle and horses as well as people. Gabriella, Rudolfo's mother, was born in a French mountain town called Lourdes in the Lorraine region of France. According to Leiter, much of Lorraine was annexed by Germany after the Franco-Prussian War, and Gabriella had moved with her family to Paris in time to live through its brutal siege by the Prussian army in 1870. The Française Donna Gabriella had been christened Marie Bertha Gabrielle Barbin in 1856, right after the Crimean War. Leiter continues, like her second son, Rudolfo, she had a birthday in early May, but unlike his childhood, hers was scarred by the jolting dislocations and brutal deprivations of war. Following the siege of Paris, during a winter of extreme cold and dwindling food, 14-year-old Gabriella ate rats to keep from starving. Now, despite a tumultuous upbringing, the educated and refined Gabriella loved to read, recite French poetry, discuss philosophy, and also possess skills in sewing and embroidery. She was described as being a wonderful storyteller, recounting stories of nobility, of their adventures and their glories. She really was an all-around well-rounded person, despite what she had been through. Gabriella met her soon-to-be husband while serving as the companion of the noble lady Marchesa Giovanazzi. The two would officially enter each other's sphere when Giovanni came to the well-to-do estate to tend to the horses, pigs, and cattle who called the estate home. There, Giovanni and Gabriella met. Emily Leiter explains, soft-spoken, virtuous, and accomplished both in languages and with her needle, Gabriella first won the veterinarian's admiration and then his love, which she returned, prizing studious, intelligent, hard-working Giovanni Guglielmi for his ambition and his dignified devotion. As a man approaching 30, Valentino was able to look back at life and evaluate the relationship of his parents with much more experience and maturity. In a letter to Chaumank, in which Valentino discussed his father and his parents' marriage, he wrote, I remember today with a sharply etched distinction the time of my father's death. There was something very close and beautiful, very dear and intimate between my mother and my father. I think it was one of those true loves of the world, one of the dearest married loves it has ever been my privilege to see. In fact, I owe this idealism I have concerning marriage to that early example of the existence of such a thing. There are few marriages like that of those two individuals. Now, Giovanni and Gabriella married in June of 1889. The couple would have 4 children, though only 3 of them would live past infancy. The firstborn of Giovanni and Gabriella, a girl named Bice, lived through only 2 summers, Leiter writes. Born in June 1890, a year after the wedding of her parents, she was buried soon after her first birthday in August. Donna Gabriella regularly visited the cemetery in Castellaneta to pray and place flowers on little Bice's tombstone, which the stonemason marked at her request with a large black cross and engraved with the lines, in both French and Italian, that Gabriella chose from the poet Malherbe. It read, She lived as roses live, no longer than a morning. The next child to be born of Giovanni and Gabriella would be Antonio, who was born on April 5, 1892, in Rome during his father's military service there. Rodolfo was next in line, followed by the youngest, a sister named Maria, who was born on September 1, 1897. Now, we are all here for Rodolfo, so let's focus on his birth for a bit. The future star was born in Castellaneta, Apulia, Italy, on May 6, 1895. The third-born child would be baptized as Rudolfo Pietro Filiberto Raffaele. Now, if you are familiar with the Valentino history and legacy, you might notice a name or two missing from his official moniker. Before we dive into the wacky world of names, let's get a geographic for a moment. In case you are unaware, Castellaneta is a city in southern Italy in the province of Taranto in the Apulia region, located about 25 miles from Toronto. The Valentino hometown is located in a territory spanning from the Murgia to the Ionian Sea. An easy way to remember it, I like to think, is that Calabria is the toe of the boot, while Castellaneta would be considered in the heel or instep of that Italian boot. Now, geography lesson aside, let's look back at that mouthful of a name bestowed upon the young boy. While it looks impressive, let's break it down and see what was really involved in that name. This is a prime example of separating fact from fiction. You see, stories get told, and especially in the fantastical world of film and Hollywood, things aren't always as they seem. Rudolph Valentino was a man of high ideals and high self-image. As a child, he boasted quite an imagination. As a child living out his own daydreams and imaginary adventures to hearing tales of royalty and chivalry from his mother, Valentino saw more than humble beginnings. Whether he was telling tales to childhood friends or reporters as an adult, Valentino always seemed to add a little touch of magic. Emily Leiter would write, The less remote Guglielmi ancestors, so far as we know, were not high-born, but as he grew up, Rodolfo wanted them to be. He read and was told adventure stories and imagined himself a sword-rattling crusader, a daredevil medieval prince, or a knight in armor riding bareback to pursue brigands or dueling to protect his family's honor. The chivalric code and the medieval idea that a knight must fight to defend his good name was very much alive to him. But how does a kid's imagination like that play out as an adult? Leiter would continue, As a young man, Rodolfo would reinvent himself as the descendant of aristocrats, endowing himself with impressive additional names that aren't present on any birth or baptismal record. Di Valentina di Antangela precedes Guglielmi in his account. He claimed his parents so named him, explaining that the Di Valentina is a papal title, romantic because the word Valentino in Italian means sweetheart, and historic for its association with the Borgias, and the Diantangela indicates an obscure right to a certain royal property which is entirely forgotten now. Rodolfo insisted that his mother told him that in a love duel his illustrious Roman forebear had killed a member of the powerful Colonna family and had been forced to flee to Martina Franca. Now, the family's life in Castellaneta was nothing out of the ordinary. According to Steiger and Mank, although the Guglielmi's white corner house near the village square was hardly the ancestral palace that press agents later designated as Valentino's birthplace, it was a comfortable home, and Giovanni was able to provide quite well for his family. As far as the family dynamics were concerned, Albert, the older brother, was a pretty low-key kid who kept the line and was a studious sort, which pleased his parents to no end. Where Rodolfo tended to follow his mother, Alberto would be more a product out of his father's mold. Eventually, Alberto would be sent to stay with the family of an uncle in a nearby town to attend a school. Maria, his younger sister, got along with her brother Rudolfo incredibly well. They could be two peas in a pod at times. According to Leiter, Maria served as Rudolfo's ally, sometimes joining as his partner in mischief, very often providing the immediate responses he wanted. Maria often enjoyed providing the attention her brother sought. On the topic of that mischief, it often ended up that the young boy would be punished by his father. Being a military man, Giovanni could be pretty harsh with his troublesome son. When it was called for, a whip or a cane would provide painful punishment. Those harsh moments would add to the gulf that grew between Rodolfo and his father. His mother would prove to be his safe space. Her realm, explains Leiter, decorative handiwork, aristocratic connections, fluency in several languages, reading French poetry aloud, dramatic storytelling, soulful prayer, felt more comfortable to him than did his father's reserve, strict standards, and scientific pursuits. As a child, Valentino was indulged because of his good looks and his playful personality. His mother coddled him while his father disapproved of his behavior. This would lead to poor marks in school, a theme that you'll see will follow the boy for quite a while. Childhood friend Ada Maldrazzi recalled that young Rudy made little effort to improve himself academically. In the book Valentino, the First Superstar, she would tell author Noel Botham, "There were no formal schools. We received our education from the parish priest and from local married women and spinsters who gave lessons in their front rooms in return for much-needed cash. But Rodolfo hated studying. As a young child, Rodolfo was incredibly rambunctious. He was like almost all children his age in that instance. If there was something to climb, he climbed it. If there was something to jump off of, he jumped off of it. He played the roles of knights and daredevils every day in the streets and fields of Castellaneta, and he certainly ended up with his fair share of scrapes and minor injuries. In fact, he would incur an injury at this young age that would scar him for the rest of his life. Noel Botham writes, "At the age of 5, an experiment with his father's cutthroat razor left Rodolfo with a horizontal slash across his right cheek, creating a lifelong scar. Even though they know the truth, he told his friends in Castellaneta it had been inflicted during a mighty duel, which he, of course, had won. And 25 years later, he was uniquely consistent in telling reporters of a wholly fictitious account of his childhood for the benefit of his fans, and that he had received the scar in a duel. But this time the duel was set in Paris and was over a lady's honor." This is incredibly fascinating to read. Like, how wild is it that one of the most handsome men in the world carried a facial scar that held his career back in the zero way at all, really? Rodolfo was so charming and full of that aura and that magic that a scar on his cheek was no hindrance. As an adult, Valentino knew how to work angles and visuals in such a way as to downplay this childhood injury, but you can really still catch it in a lot of his movies, especially in films like The Sheik. I think it really adds to the characters and roles he played to have this little nick on his face. It really speaks to how the young boy lived his life. He sought adventure and excitement, oftentimes to the detriment of his own life and safety. This was no isolated incident, Leiter writes. Rodolfo had a reckless streak, and despite hands adept at tinkering and legs that moved with panther-like nimbleness, he got into scrapes and injured himself regularly. The impetuous boy lacked any trace of caution, and he could not sit still. He would aggressively hurl objects at others, vault up cliffs, and straddle fences, often getting his clothes torn and sometimes breaking things, more out of inattention than malice. Rudolfo would soon be displaced from his beloved hometown of Castellaneta. The Guglielmi family moved from Castellaneta to the more city-fied environment of Toronto, Italy. One of the driving causes of this relocation was Giovanni's plans to advance his career in the malaria research field. In Toronto, the veterinarian felt he could devote more time to his precious research and development of malaria information, if you will. This change of scenery really had a negative impact on the boy. His life was uprooted, and all of the things he found comfort in were gone. He was in a city environment now. He no longer had access to the wide open fields and nature and other surroundings that provided him with so much relief. In March of 1906, tragedy would strike the family. In the course of experimenting with malaria and its properties, Giovanni contracted the disease himself. The patriarch would succumb to the disease before he could come to a solution for its annihilation. At the time of his father's death, Rodolfo was 10 years old. The death of a parent is tough for any child. For young Rodolfo, who was already a troubled and at-risk youth, this tragedy would hit even harder. According to Emily Leiter, he was fatherless at the age of 10, and his disobedience, untruthfulness, contempt for authority, and chronic hooky playing caused his mother endless worry, bafflement, and dismay, although he smothered her with affection. With his father dead and Alberto living out of town, the home of Rodolfo was now a feminine domain. His uncles and friends of his father all felt that the boy needed more masculine guidance in his life to sort of get it back on track. In order for that to happen, the now 12-year-old boy would find himself sent off to the boarding school for orphans of Italian health professionals in the Umbrian town of Perugia. Rodolfo and even his biographers would label this school as a military academy, but it really wasn't. It was more of a technical school of sorts that gave young men training for work as mechanics, engineers, and accountants, while also providing a foundation in the liberal arts. For all you smoking fans out there, quick smoking side tangent alert. We are, for good or bad, a podcast that appreciates cigarettes and old Hollywood stories surrounding the smoking of those cigarettes. So, looking at young Rodolfo's smoking habits was a no-brainer for us. It was at this school in Perugia that the young Rodolfo first smoked a cigarette. What was experimental in the beginning would lead to chain smoking later on in life. Valentino explains his earliest lung dart memories, explaining, "We wore long cloaks when out of doors in the colder weather and used to steal a smoke beneath their folds. But often the odor or nicotine stains on our fingers were the cause of dire punishment, so we used to scrub our hands with lemons." Bad habits aside, this run at school would be tough on the young man. He found it hard to fit in. It was a hard life for students to live. The hours were difficult and the surroundings were a bit on the foreboding side. Definitely not the quaint village life he was so used to. According to Robert Oberfirst in his book Rudolph Valentino, The Man Behind the Myth, we read, "Rodolfo's adventurous spirit was glad to be away from home, but he missed his family. Between thoughts of home and his vivid imagination, he was too busy to pay much attention to his studies. He read books of romance and adventure. He transported himself to the world of knights and dueling musketeers. He was far happier in the realm of his imagination than the real world." The train of Rodolfo's education was precariously still situated on the tracks. It was only a matter of time, though, before it went off the rails. This boarding school experience was destined for trouble. His student days in Perugia ended disastrously, Emily Leiter explains. The field he was being trained in, engineering, failed to excite his interest, and his chronic class cutting caught up with him. Rodolfo faced expulsion from school. In order to avoid having his record blemished for all time with the black mark of expulsion, Gabriella, when warned by the headmaster that disgrace was imminent, withdrew him from the boarding school. In an effort to turn things around, Gabriella and Rodolfo decided to change things up a bit. With a failed schooling experience behind him, the young man turned his sights on a career of service. While he didn't have the status or schooling to join the same lofty military ranks his father did, he still saw a future on the high seas. This option came from a naval technical school in Venice. This was the perfect setup for Rodolfo. His near expulsion in Perugia had been his rock bottom. He really needed to turn things around and fast. Again, his mother stepped up and provided the help and care that the 15-year-old needed when he needed it the most. In Dark Lover, we read Valentino's thoughts on his new career path. He would recall, I wanted to get onto the Navy. I expect the presence of so much shipping in Toronto Harbor excited my imagination. I was always impatient, headstrong, and inclined for a life of excitement. Considering how his life had been up to this point, it was refreshing to see Rodolfo with a positive outlook on life. He finally saw a future for himself, and his mother would do whatever it took to foster this new disposition. The two were seemingly in a great place. Gabriella was able to borrow a uniform from the boarding school in Perugia, so her son had something nice and respectable to show up in Venice and make a good first impression. Now, I love seeing this relationship between Rodolfo and his mother and how it grew and evolved throughout his life. I personally am lucky enough to have parents who would indulge me in my weird and eccentric behavior. I was never a troublemaker or a problem child per se, but they still were always there to support me in any way they could. Even to this day, despite being older and in poor health, they try to support me as best they can. I loved seeing Gabriella stick behind her son when he needed extra support every now and again. At this point, things were really looking up for Rodolfo. Leiter explains how this new situation really brought out the best in the boy. She writes, Rodolfo spent a brief preparatory period in Venice, where for the first time in his life he applied himself to study, cramming for his test, and then turned up for his exam in a handsome borrowed uniform, plus a new winter coat. All that sounds great, right? Rodolfo was finally inspired and willing to make his life work. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Leiter continues, despite his smart appearance and his exertions to get himself into good physical as well as intellectual trim before presenting himself to the examiners in Venice, Rodolfo once again failed to measure up. He passed the written exam, but not the physical. The Venetian naval doctors ruled that his chest measurement fell short by 2 centimeters. Because of this physical deficiency, he was not even allowed to continue the physical. Valentino would later recall, here I was, 15 and a complete failure. I returned home heartsick and ambitionless, and I stayed a year. I did little except cause my dear mother worry. Though it wouldn't end up being in the Navy, Rodolfo would certainly have a life of excitement ahead of him. But that's getting a little ahead of ourselves a bit. While we're here, though, I can only imagine what this failure of the physical did to Rodolfo's self-image and self-worth. Throughout his career, Valentino would take his looks and what others thought about him to heart. You can't help but see a correlation between this and later interactions with the media. Again, Gabriella would come to the rescue of her sweet boy. She saw another opportunity to get her son's life kick-started, and this time, it was more landlocked. She saw how much enjoyment he'd gotten out of outdoors activities and adventures. She also knew he loved riding horses and caring for them, and cattle for that matter. She thought he could apply those interests to a career in landscaping, animal husbandry, and general scientific agriculture. He applied to the Agricultural Institute of St. Ilario of Liguria and was accepted. This agricultural school in a small village called Nervi was located in the province of Genoa in the Liguria region. What exactly does one learn about when attending the Agricultural Institute of St. Ilario of Liguria? Emily Leiter takes us through the curriculum, writing, in agricultural school, Rodolfo was taught a great deal about how to grow maize, stake grapevines, plant orange and olive trees, and thin flower beds. He learned how to irrigate and cultivate terraces, how to build drywalls, and how to combine different kinds of plants in a way pleasing to the eye, and how to prune and shape hedges and trees. The techniques were all adapted to the realities of farming in Italy circa 1911, a time when many farmers still used mules and oxen to pull wagons. This was work he enjoyed. Life at the school harkened back to his experiences at boarding schools and military schools of his past. The schedules were heavily regimented and students even wore uniforms. Rodolfo had been through enough to know he was running out of second chances and bonus opportunities. He had to get his life in order, and it was now or never. He also saw this as an opportunity to improve himself physically as well. Leiter writes, he was taught the rudiments of fencing, wrestling, and as he attained his adult height, worked on improving his muscle power and expanding the scrawny chest that had disqualified him from the Naval Academy. He would remain a fitness fanatic for the rest of his life. Rodolfo would also learn about life outside of school in Nervi. He would make friendships and connections while he studied there. He experienced adventures carousing with classmates after hours while also exploring the areas outside of town. The young man even took piano lessons while away at school. The 15-year-old Rodolfo entered the school for agriculture and for the first time managed to see a course of study to its completion. This graduation and corresponding certificate entitled him to be a practicing scientific farmer. According to Valentino, an intimate and shocking expose, we read, at 18, Rudolph had reached his full height of 5 feet 11 inches and had built a lean, muscular physique. No longer the swaggering bully, he had developed a charming manner that adequately concealed the nagging self-doubts he had acquired after his long series of adolescent failures. It was this new blooming Rodolfo who successfully obtained his mother's permission to go to Paris. Now, Rodolfo leaving for Paris wasn't all just for the sake of adventure and experiencing the unknown. Despite graduating from the agricultural school, the young man was in no big hurry to apply his newfound diploma to actual work. Returning home to Toronto, he became somewhat of a roustabout, shiftless, uninspired. He felt the eyes of the town folk upon him. They constantly judged everything he did and everyone he spent time with. This point in his life of the young man is really when his hormones started kicking in. Emily Leiter takes us through this time fraught with physical and emotional upheaval and exploration. Leiter writes, like many a youth brought up to become a gentleman in a Puritan climate, Rodolfo struggled to reconcile his ideals with his desires. Within him contended love and lust, romance and sex. On one side, amorous, poetic yearning smoldered. On the other, roared his overheated hormones. While at the agricultural school, he had a quasi-girlfriend named Felicita. It was a sweet time of puppy love and unrequited physicality. It was an experience that set him on an amorous path. His love life would become very complicated as the years went on, but at this point, he was just stepping out into that world. In an article with Photoplay, the heartthrob would open up about his Italian heart. He would recall, I was always in love. Young Italians always are. I used to spend hours copying passages from Tasso and Ariosto. In this period of poetical hysteria, I compared the fair one to sunsets that flame out of heaven, the clouds kissed silver by a loving moon. He would add, an American may speak love with his lips. The Italian must say it with his eyes. Rodolfo, now in his late teens, took his restless spirit to the city of lights. Paris, he felt at once, belonged to him, Emily Leiter writes. Strolling along the grand boulevards, losing himself in the crowd streaming through brightly lit arcades whose polished windows beckoned, he sniffed the heady air as if it contained helium. He was like a zoo animal released from a cage into the wild, but his wild was the cosmopolitan metropolis. Leiter continues, in Paris he could revel in anonymity. He could go where he pleased, with whom he pleased. No one was going to check on or reproach him for staying up until morning's wee hours, or for promenading dressed to the nines with a showgirl. On the contrary, here in Paris, the actions that in Toronto would have been tagged indiscretions won him admiring glances, and everywhere he found companions who had no more pressing occupation than to chase delight and feast on diversion. As Rodolfo enjoyed all that Paris had to offer, he focused on one thing in particular, the world of dance. Everywhere he went, he saw dancing. It really captured his imagination and would be a specialty of his throughout his life. This Parisian era of Rudolph Valentino is definitely worthy of its own dedicated episode. His time there presented its own victories and heartbreaks. There were magical experiences, but his lack of finances would eventually bring him back to Italy. That, fine listeners, is a bit of a tease. I think we may go in depth into that flashy era of the young man, so stay tuned to stay up to date on all the upcoming Valentino voyages that we go on throughout 2026. In Paris, and later Monte Carlo, Rodolfo would lose all his money, including, unfortunately, money sent from his mother. He had to return to Toronto with his tail firmly between his legs. Emily Leiter would explain this return to Toronto in her book Dark Lover. She writes, he resumed his old ways, sleeping late, hanging out in the town square and at the cafes, perhaps going to movies at either of the 2 Toronto cinemas, and keeping company with singers, layabouts, and dancers. He bought gifts for girlfriends and sent a bill to his mother. As far as his uncles were concerned, he was headed straight for the gutter. They felt that he would only continue to disgrace the family, and he should be encouraged to move as far from Toronto as possible. Unable to secure employment, and to put some distance between him and prying eyes, Rudolfo departed for the United States in 1913. It was a chance to start fresh and make something of himself. He hated the idea of being so far away from his loving mother, but a change of scenery was absolutely necessary. Between 1890 and 1914, Leiter explains, the United States had open immigration laws, and its cities were filling rapidly with people from the poorest and most oppressed sections of Europe and Eastern Europe. Rudolfo, unlike most of his emigrating countrymen, was not escaping chronic family poverty, but rather his own track record and the sense of defeat it helped to create. Now that quote brings us to a shameless plug moment. If you are curious about the state of Italian immigration in the United States at this point in time, scroll back to our Season 4 episode focusing on the 1915 film The Italian. It's a movie about an Italian immigrant, and we dive into the details of the waves of Italians making their ways past the Statue of Liberty. Like she always did, Gabriella was there for her son. She bought a ticket for her boy to sail to the United States of America at the tail end of 1913 aboard the SS Cleveland. The voyage departed from Naples to Genoa before heading out to New York on adventures exciting and new. The now 18-year-old Rodolfo, with help from his mother, of course, had set a course for adventure in his mind on a new romance. And with Rodolfo on the high seas, we should start wrapping up this season premiere and first stop of the life of screen legend Rudolph Valentino. There is so much great stuff left to talk about, and we look forward to sharing it all with you fine listeners as the year progresses. If this episode seemed heavy on the Emily Leiter content, you're not wrong. Her Dark Lover book was filled with so much incredible information. If you think there was a lot of it in this episode, I have only included the merest fraction of what the full book has to offer you. There is so much more about the early life of Rudolfo that was surprising and enlightening. I said it earlier and will reiterate it now. This biography is a must-read, and don't worry for a second that too much has been spoiled. It is definitely worth checking out. With all of that being said, it is time to find out where your favorite silent film parents are laid to rest. This is the segment where we join the golden stars on the other side of the cemetery gates. The history, the art, the celebrity spectacle converge in Where Are They Now? Your guide to paying your respects to the parents of those who've entertained us so much. As you may recall from earlier in the episode, his father, Giovanni Guglielmi, would die tragically from the very scourge he sought to end altogether. Rudolfo was 10 years old when his father passed away. Emily Leiter takes us through the final stages of Giovanni's life. She writes, Giovanni's death at the age of 53 in March of 1906 was the end result of his marathon exertions on behalf of his biomedical research on malaria. Throughout his final vigil, he toiled incessantly with slides, microscope, and test tubes, growing haggard and closing himself off from friends, his children, everyone except Gabriella. Leiter continues, later, Rudolfo claimed he, Alberto, and Maria stood near their mother to watch the funeral coach drawn by 6 black horses, the horseman in his Chiron-like uniform of silver and black. 4 men who had been Giovanni's closest friends each held a huge tassel attached to the hearse. This recollection may have been embellished for the benefit of movie fans who were reading Valentino's ghost-written life story and photoplay, but even if the actual scene wasn't quite so picturesque, Giovanni was an important enough citizen to merit considerable pomp and ceremony. So, with this stage of Valentino's life coming to a close, we want to thank you for spending your Latin-loving time with us. It's been a ton of fun focusing on the formative years of Rudolph Valentino we know today. There is so much great content to mine from this cinematic life, and the story has only just begun. No need to worry, though. There are many more chapters to go, and we will be here for all of them, and we hope you will be too. We also want to thank you for indulging us in this second and more in-depth look at the life of the movie legend. Listening back to that original episode way back in 2021 was rough at times. We have grown so much and on so many different levels. I look at this season as our attempt to give Rudolph Valentino the episode he so richly deserves as a person. This is also our chance to give you fine listeners the episode you deserved to listen to. Did you enjoy the first chapter of this biographical year-long adventure? What are your favorite Valentino films that we should cover here? Did you enjoy the trip to Italy as much as we did? Tell us your Italian stories and adventures. Let us know all those beautiful details at the various social media spots of the Golden Silent Films podcast. On that note, if you have forgotten, we're on Instagram, Bluesky, and Twitter. Let us know what you thought of this episode. What silent and silent-related movies, past or present, do you want us to look at next, with or without Rudolph Valentino? What silent-related lives should we dive into? Our world of silent movie knowledge and experience is always expanding, and we need your input for future episodes here and beyond. Again, if you listen to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or any other podcast outlet that allows it, subscribe, rate, and review. If you're watching it here on YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment. It does a lot for our visibility, so please subscribe and spread the word and share the channel to other cool folks who want to check it out. We really, really appreciate all of your incredible support, and seeing how much you folks are listening on all of our many platforms only makes us want to make the best show possible. Season 6 has only just begun, and we have so much fun stuff planned. And, lest you be scared, it's not exclusively Valentino this year either. While there will be a year's worth of Latin lover content, we will still have a ton of non-Valentino topics ready to go as well. So with all that being said, thank you to all of you fine listeners for all of your fine listening. And don't forget, the silents are golden and the talkies are just a fad. And stay tuned for more Valentino.